When I walked into my parents' house that day, I never expected to hear my mother say these words to my children. But there she was, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, looking down at my two kids like they were unwanted guests at their own grandparents' home. My sister's kids eat first, and your kids wait for the crumbs. The words hit me like a physical blow. My 8-year-old daughter Emma looked up at me with those big brown eyes, confusion written all over her face. My 6-year-old son, Jake, was already retreating to the corner, his small shoulders hunched in that way that broke my heart every single time. This wasn't the first time. God, how I wished it was the first time. My name is Sarah, and I've spent 32 years trying to figure out why I was born into a family that treated me like an unwelcome stranger. Growing up, I always assumed it was something I'd done wrong, some fundamental flaw in my character that made me less lovable than my younger sister Rebecca. But watching my own children experience that same cold rejection, I finally understood the truth. Some families are just broken, and no amount of trying to fix them will ever make them whole. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of my sister's twins, Madison and Tyler, loudly slurping their soup at the dining room table. They were the same ages as my kids, but you'd never know it from the way they were treated. Madison wore a brand new dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes for both my children combined. Tyler had the latest gaming device in his hands, something my kids had been asking Santa for since last Christmas. My children sat in that corner, staring at empty plates that had been placed in front of them like some cruel joke. The ceramic surfaces gleamed white and barren under the harsh overhead light, a stark contrast to the heaping portions my sister's kids enjoyed just 20 feet away. "Mum," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "they're hungry. They haven't eaten since breakfast." My mother turned those cold, grey eyes on me, the same eyes that had looked through me my entire childhood. "They can wait. Rebecca's children are guests." "They're not guests," I said, finding a little more strength in my voice. "This is supposed to be their grandparents' house too." Rebecca laughed from her position at the table, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "Get used to it, Sarah. Your kids were born to live off what's left. Just like you were." The casual cruelty in her voice was nothing new, but hearing it directed at my children lit something inside me that I'd kept buried for years. Emma's bottom lip started to tremble, and Jake pressed himself further into the corner, making himself as small as possible. My father finally spoke from his recliner in the living room, not even bothering to look away from his newspaper. "They need to learn their place. The sooner the better." Learn their place. As if being 6 and 8 years old meant they deserved to be treated like second-class citizens in their own family. As if the accident of being born to me instead of Rebecca automatically made them worth less. I thought about all the times I'd sat in that same corner as a child, watching Rebecca get the bigger slice of cake, the nicer Christmas presents, the encouraging words when she brought home a B+, while my A's went unnoticed. I remembered the family vacation to Disney World when I was 12, the one they took Rebecca on while I stayed with my aunt, because there wasn't enough room in the car. I remembered graduation day when they missed my valedictory speech because Rebecca had a soccer game that same afternoon. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about Emma and Jake, 2 innocent children who had done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being born to the family scapegoat. I looked at my kids, really looked at them. Emma was trying so hard to be brave, but I could see the hurt swimming in her eyes. Jake had gone completely quiet, which was never a good sign. He was the type of kid who chattered constantly when he was happy, but trauma made him retreat into himself like a turtle pulling into its shell. "We're leaving," I said quietly. My mother scoffed. "You just got here. And now we're leaving." I walked over to my children and knelt down to their level. "Come on, guys, let's go get some real dinner." Emma's small hand slipped into mine, warm and trusting despite everything. Jake peeled himself away from the wall and grabbed my other hand. As we walked toward the door, I could hear Rebecca's voice behind us. "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. They'll get fed eventually." Eventually, like my children's hunger was negotiable. Like their basic needs were less important than maintaining some twisted family hierarchy that had been established before they were even born. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to speak without saying something I'd regret. Instead, I guided my kids out the front door and into the late afternoon sunlight. The fresh air felt like freedom after the suffocating atmosphere inside that house. "Mommy," Emma said as I buckled her into her car seat, "why doesn't Grandma like us?" The question I'd been dreading. The one I'd asked myself 1,000 times growing up. And had never found a satisfactory answer to. "It's not that she doesn't like you, sweetheart," I lied, smoothing her hair away from her face. "Some people just don't know how to show love properly." Jake was quiet during the drive to McDonald's, our impromptu dinner destination that would probably cost me the last $20 in my checking account until payday. But seeing their faces light up over happy meals was worth every penny. They deserved to feel joy, to feel valued, to feel like they mattered. As they played in the McDonald's playground, their earlier sadness temporarily forgotten, I pulled out my phone. There was already a text from Rebecca. "You're teaching your kids to be dramatic. This is why they don't fit in." I stared at those words for a long time. This is why they don't fit in. As if the problem was with my children, not with a family system so toxic it treated elementary school kids like they were burdens to be endured, rather than grandchildren to be cherished. But sitting there in that McDonald's, watching Emma help Jake reach the monkey bars and hearing their genuine laughter for the first time all day, something crystallized in my mind. Maybe the problem wasn't that we didn't fit in. Maybe the problem was that we kept trying to. I thought about my childhood, about all the ways I'd twisted myself into knots trying to earn love that was never going to come. I thought about the money I'd quietly sent to my parents over the years when they had emergencies. Money that went toward Rebecca's kids' private school tuition and summer camps, while my own children wore hand-me-downs and attended public school. I thought about the inheritance from my grandmother that had mysteriously gone entirely to Rebecca because she needed it more. Despite the fact that I was a single mother working 2 jobs while Rebecca's husband made 6 figures. I thought about the family photos that hung in my parents' hallway. Dozens of pictures of Rebecca's kids, and exactly 1 school photo of Emma and Jake tucked away in the back corner like an afterthought. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just been too desperate for acceptance to see it clearly. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Rebecca's children barely got to see their grandparents today because of your tantrum. You're being selfish. Selfish. For protecting my children from emotional abuse. For refusing to let them be treated like they were worth less than their cousins. For prioritizing their well-being over my family's dysfunctional expectations. I looked up at Emma and Jake, now sitting at a small table, sharing French fries and chattering happily about their day at school. They were resilient, these kids of mine. They bounced back from hurt faster than I ever could. But that didn't mean they should have to. That night, after I'd tucked them into bed and read them 2 stories and sung Emma's favourite lullaby, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and really thought about our situation for the first time in years. I'd been so focused on trying to maintain some semblance of a relationship with my family that I'd lost sight of what was actually best for my children. Emma and Jake deserved better than to grow up feeling like they had to earn love through perfect behaviour and self-sacrifice. They deserved better than to learn that family meant accepting cruelts and swallowing your dignity. They deserved better than to repeat the same patterns I'd been trapped in for 3 decades. The realisation should have been liberating, but mostly it just felt overwhelming. How do you break a cycle that's been in motion for generations? How do you protect your children from people who are supposed to love them unconditionally? I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. David Martinez, the family lawyer who'd helped me with my divorce 2 years earlier. He'd mentioned something during our meetings about inheritance law, about how family money could be tied up in ways that weren't always fair or legal. It was probably nothing. My parents didn't have that much money anyway, and what they did have would almost certainly go to Rebecca, regardless of what any will might say. But something was nagging at me, some half-remembered conversation about my grandmother's estate and the way my grandfather's business had been structured. I'd never asked questions before. I'd accepted whatever scraps were thrown my way and been grateful for them. But watching my children sitting in that corner today, staring at empty plates while their cousins feasted, had awakened something in me that I'd kept buried for too long. Maybe it was time to start asking questions. Maybe it was time to stop accepting scraps and start demanding the respect my children deserved. Maybe it was time to stop being the family doormat and start being the mother my kids needed me to be. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to either stand up or back down. But for the first time in my adult life, I knew which choice I was going to make. That McDonald's dinner became a turning point I didn't expect. As I watched Emma and Jake sleep peacefully that night, something had shifted inside me. The next morning, I called David Martinez before I could lose my nerve. "Sarah," his voice carried surprise, "it's been a while. How are Emma and Jake doing?" "They're good, but I need to ask you about something that's been bothering me for years." I took a deep breath. My grandmother's inheritance, the one that went entirely to my sister. "You mentioned once that sometimes family estates aren't handled properly. What did you mean by that?" There was a pause on the other end. "That's a complicated question. What specifically concerns you about your grandmother's estate?" I told him everything. About how my grandmother had always promised to take care of all her grandchildren equally, about the house she'd left that somehow ended up being sold with all proceeds going to Rebecca, about the life insurance policy I'd helped pay premiums on for years that I never saw a penny of, about the family business my grandfather had built that Rebecca's husband now mysteriously had shares in. "Sarah," David said slowly, "how long ago did your grandmother pass?" 3 years, but the estate was supposedly complicated and took over a year to settle. "And you were never shown the actual will? Never given copies of any documentation?" "My parents said it would just upset me. That Rebecca needed the money more because she has 2 kids and a mortgage." David was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke. "I think we need to meet. Can you come to my office tomorrow? And Sarah, bring any documentation you have. Bank statements showing payments you made. Any correspondence about the estate. Anything at all." That night, I went through every box of papers I had, gathering evidence I didn't even know I'd been collecting. Bank statements showing the monthly payments I'd made to help with my grandmother's care. Copies of checks I'd written for her medical expenses. A birthday card from her the year before she died, with a handwritten note. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm making sure you and your children are taken care of." The next day in David's office, spread across his conference table, my scattered papers began to tell a story I'd never seen clearly before. "Sarah," David said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed a particularly damaging bank statement. "You've been financially supporting your parents and your grandmother for years. These payments you've been making, they're not small amounts." I looked at the numbers he was highlighting. 500 here, 300 there, the occasional $1,000 emergency that always seemed to coincide with Rebecca's kids needing something expensive. I wanted to help. Family is supposed to help each other. Help is mutual. This looks more like... Date. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This looks like financial exploitation. Your parents have been using you as a bank while simultaneously excluding you from family assets." The room felt like it was spinning. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you've been contributing significantly to family finances while being denied your rightful inheritance, we might have grounds for a legal challenge. And if your grandmother's will was executed improperly..." He trailed off, making notes on his legal pad. "David, I don't want to sue my family. I just want to understand what happened." He looked up at me with those kind eyes that had helped me through my divorce. "Sarah, understanding what happened might require legal action. And honestly, after seeing these financial records, I think you owe it to Emma and Jake to find out the truth." Emma and Jake, my children, who sat in corners staring at empty plates while their cousins lived in luxury, partially funded by their mother's sacrifice. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I'm going to request copies of your grandmother's will and all estate documents. That's your legal right as a family member. Second, I want you to start documenting every interaction with your family, especially anything involving money or the children. And third," he hesitated, "I want you to be prepared for this to get ugly. Family money disputes always do." I thought about yesterday's scene in my parents' kitchen, about Rebecca's casual cruelty and my parents' cold indifference. How much uglier could it really get? 2 weeks later, I had my answer. The documents David obtained painted a picture so shocking I had to read them 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. My grandmother hadn't left everything to Rebecca. She'd left her estate split equally between Rebecca and me, with specific provisions for Emma and Jake's education funds. But someone had forged documents. Someone had created a false will that left everything to Rebecca, then used their position as executor to liquidate assets before anyone could question the authenticity. And that someone was my father. Sarah, David said as we sat in his office reviewing the evidence, this isn't just family drama, this is fraud, criminal fraud. The real will included something even more shocking. Detailed documentation of every payment I'd made toward my grandmother's care, with specific language stating that those contributions should be considered when distributing assets. My grandmother hadn't just left me an equal share. She'd left me additional compensation for being the grandchild who actually took care of her. The total amount you're legally entitled to, David continued, including the fraudulently distributed inheritance and compensation for your caregiving contributions, is approximately $240,000. I stared at him. I'm sorry, what? 240,000. That's what was stolen from you and your children. The number was so large it didn't feel real. That was enough to buy a house, to pay for Emma and Jake's college educations, to give them the security and opportunities I'd been unable to provide, while unknowingly funding their cousin's privileged lifestyle. What happens now? Now we file criminal charges for inheritance fraud and civil claims for recovery of assets. And Sarah, he leaned forward, his expression serious. You need to be prepared for your family's reaction. They're about to realize that their financial house of cards is about to collapse. I thought about Emma and Jake, about the way they'd shrunk into that corner while Madison and Tyler enjoyed privileges their stolen inheritance had funded. I thought about all the times I'd apologized for not being able to afford the things other kids had, never knowing that the money for those things had been deliberately kept from us. File everything, I said. The papers were served 3 days later. David had warned me to expect angry phone calls, but nothing could have prepared me for the absolute meltdown that followed. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. My mother's voice was shrill with panic. Sarah, what have you done? How could you destroy this family over money? I didn't destroy anything, Mum. I found out the truth. That there is no truth. That money was Rebecca's. She needed it more. The will says otherwise. Wills can be wrong. I almost laughed. This one wasn't wrong. It was forged. The line went quiet for several long seconds. Then my father's voice came on. He must have grabbed the phone. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, everything they'd done for me, like treating my children as second-class family members, like using me as an ATM while denying me my legal inheritance, like creating a family dynamic so toxic that my kids were learning to expect rejection and cruels as normal. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. We clothed you. That's called being a parent. It's not a favour you do for your child that they owe you for life. You watch your mouth, young lady. You may think you're smart with your fancy lawyer, but family is family. This won't stand. But it would stand. David had been very clear about that. The evidence was overwhelming, the fraud was obvious, and my case was rock solid. Rebecca's call came that afternoon, and it was a masterclass in manipulation that would have worked on me just a month earlier. "Sarah, please, think about what you're doing. Mum and Dad are devastated. They might lose the house." They should have thought about that before they stole from their grandchildren. It wasn't stealing, it was family taking care of family. By leaving 2 kids to eat crumbs while the other 2 got everything? You're being dramatic. Madison and Tyler barely got more than Emma and Jake. I thought about Madison's designer clothes and Tyler's expensive gaming system, about the private school tuition and summer camps and family vacations my kids had never been invited to, about the trust funds that had been set up for Rebecca's children using money that should have been split 4 ways. Rebecca, you've been spending money that legally belonged to my children for years. Money that was specifically earmarked for their education and future. We can work this out without lawyers. Family shouldn't involve lawyers. Family shouldn't involve fraud either, but here we are. Her tone shifted, becoming cold and vicious, the real Rebecca underneath the manipulative pleading. "You know what this makes you, Sarah. It makes you exactly what we always said you were. A selfish, vindictive person who would destroy her own family for money. If protecting my children makes me vindictive, then I guess I'm vindictive. Those kids of yours are going to grow up knowing their mother tore apart their family. How do you think that's going to affect them?" It was a calculated blow designed to hit my deepest fear as a mother. But for the first time in my life, I could see the manipulation for what it was. My kids are going to grow up knowing their mother fought for them. They're going to grow up knowing they're worth fighting for. And they're going to grow up with the financial security their great-grandmother intended them to have. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, as I was helping Emma with her homework, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that sometimes made her seem much older than 8. "Mommy, why is everyone calling you mean things on the phone today?" I sat down next to her at the kitchen table, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults disagree about important things. Right now I'm disagreeing with Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Rebecca about something that affects our family. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. Actually, we might have some good news soon. Jake looked up from his colouring book. What kind of good news? The kind that means you might be able to take those art classes you wanted. And maybe we can look at a house with a bigger yard. Their faces lit up with the kind of pure joy that reminded me why I was fighting this battle. Not for revenge, not for vindication, but for them. For the future they deserved. For the security that had been stolen from them before they were even old enough to understand what they'd lost. That night, after they were asleep, I sat in my living room and thought about what came next. David had explained that the legal process would take months, maybe longer. That my family would likely escalate their attacks as they realised the seriousness of the situation. That there would be depositions and court hearings and probably media attention if the fraud charges resulted in actual criminal prosecution. But I also thought about Emma and Jake growing up knowing they were valued and protected, about the college funds that would be restored to them, about never again having to watch them sit in a corner staring at empty plates while their cousins enjoyed privileges bought with their stolen inheritance. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of my family's anger. I wasn't worried about being the scapegoat or the troublemaker or the ungrateful daughter. I was their mother, and that was the only role that mattered anymore. The phone rang again, probably another family member calling to yell at me or try to guilt me into dropping the lawsuit. I looked at the screen, saw my cousin Jennifer's name, and almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Sarah?" Jennifer's voice was quiet, almost whispered. "I heard about what's happening. I wanted you to know I think you're doing the right thing." I nearly dropped the phone. Jennifer was Rebecca's age, had always been part of the inner circle that I'd been excluded from. "I mean it," she continued. What they did to you and your kids, it was wrong. It was always wrong, and I should have said something years ago. "Jennifer, there's something else you should know, something I probably should have told you a long time ago, about your grandmother's house and some other things. Can we meet tomorrow?" As I hung up, I realized that sometimes breaking a cycle of abuse doesn't just free the victim. It gives permission to others who've been silently watching to finally speak their truth too. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more complications, more proof of just how deep the deception had gone. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally on the right path. Emma and Jake deserved nothing less than the truth, and the justice that came with it.